This video has two purposes. The first is to explain the differences between the Logitech C920 and C922 if you're not sure which one to buy. And the second purpose is to compare both the C920 and C922 to the Razer Kiyo, which is the most direct competitor to these two webcams. So let's start off with the specs. The Logitech C920 records in up to 1080p 30 frames per second. The Logitech C922 records in up to 1080p 30 frames per second, but it can also do 720p 60 frames per second. And to save you time, if you just want a quick answer, the 720p 60 frames per second option on the C922 is really the only difference between that device and the Logitech C920. Otherwise, the build quality, image quality, the way it looks, they're all pretty much exactly the same. Also, for some clarification, there is also a Logitech C920X and a C922X. They're the same webcams as the C920 and C922, but they come with a 3-month XSplit license code in the box. But honestly, I didn't get the X version of either, and both the C920 and C922 came with XSplit licenses in the box. I even got two C920s, and both of them, they came with XSplit licenses in the box, so I guess it depends on where you get it. There's also a Logitech C920S. It's the same device as the Logitech C920 again, but this one has a privacy cover that comes with the device. Now, the Razer Kiyo also records in up to 1080p 30 frames per second, and like the C922, it can also do 720p 60 frames per second. It comes with a ring light built onto the device, which I'll demonstrate. The field of view on the C920 and C922 is 78 degrees, and the field of view on the Razer Kiyo is 81.6 degrees. All three devices have a 60-inch wire. They all have monitor clips so you can put it on your monitor, but they also have a 1/4-inch tripod thread at the bottom so that you can put them onto a tripod. Price. All three of these devices have been out for years, so the prices are going to fluctuate a lot, so I'll just tell you what I bought them for. I bought my Logitech C920 for $50, I got my C922 for $135, and I got my Razer Kiyo for $100. But the Kiyo is the only one that I got at its launch price. The C920, I got it on sale, and the C922, I got it at inflated prices due to the pandemic. So for current prices on all three of these webcams, links are in the description. Now here is an audio sample from all three devices. All right, right now this is sample audio from the Logitech C920 webcam, and there is a computer fan that is below me. Maybe you'll be able to hear that, maybe not, but this is the built-in microphone on the Logitech C920 webcam. Now this is the Logitech C922, and I'm testing the built-in microphone of this device. Same conditions as before. The computer is down here, fans on, maybe like 50% of its noise of usual. And yeah, this is the Logitech C922. All right, now this is an audio test with the microphone in the Razer Kiyo, and this is the built-in microphone test. I'm just speaking just a little bit more than arm's length away. Same scenarios as the other devices. This is the Razer Kiyo built-in microphone test. Now, I don't recommend using any of these webcams for their microphone. The audio is not that good. They all sound pretty tinny, though I will say the Razer Kiyo, I think, sounds the least distant of the devices. They're all the same length away from me. But the Kiyo, it sounds a less distant. It retains a little bit more of the low end, but it also picks up a lot of background noise, and it kind of makes the high end like really irritating. Like you can hear the fan from my computer like making this really obnoxious hiss. You can hear it in the other two devices, but not nearly to the degree that you can hear it's like distorted in the Razer Kiyo. But I've reviewed a few microphones on this channel. I'm currently testing a bunch of them right now so I can get some more reviews. This one's the Samsung Q2U. So if you like it, I will leave a link in the description. But when I put my review and comparison and stuff up of this microphone, then I'll put that in the description as well. Now let's get into image quality. We'll start with each device at 1080p 30 frames per second and then switch the C922 and Kiyo over to 720/60 so that we compare the smoothness between all the devices. At 1080p 30 frames per second, the Logitech C920 and C922 look pretty much identical. The sharpness, color accuracy, dynamic range, field of view, autofocus are all the same. The only minor difference is when set to the exact same settings in OBS, the C922 is very slightly warmer in color, but it's almost unnoticeable. If I didn't label them, you might not ever know which is which. The Razer Kiyo is sharper than the Logitech webcams and sharper than some of the current 1080p webcams on the market, including the newer Razer Kiyo Pro. The C920 and C922 are missing some colors. There's too much red where there should be brown, and it can't quite get the white balance as accurate as some of the more premium webcams. The Kiyo's colors are worse though. Everything is either yellow or blue, no matter how you shift the white balance, no in between. I'm going to demonstrate the practical issues that arise from the color inaccuracies of the Razer Kiyo shortly with some green screen performance, but you can already see right here, there's yellow and like kind of orange leaking into the entire shot. Skin tone, the green screen, the Nintendo Switch that's here, even the box that I'm holding up. It's just like really a big problem for the Razer Kiyo. Now for exposure and dynamic range, how well these webcams can show detail with very bright and very dark colors at the same time. At nighttime, they're all about the same. They don't get to the level of more premium webcams like the Logitech Brio or the Razer Kiyo Pro, but they're all here in this test. They're all about even. In the daytime, though, you do see the Razer Kiyo getting blown out in the back by the sun. Even when you drop it down to its lowest exposure value and the gain down to 0, it still gets overpowered by the sun, whereas the C920 and C922 don't get overpowered nearly as much. Speaking of lighting, the ring light on the Razer Kiyo isn't very bright or soft, but in low light conditions, it does give this thing an edge over the C920 and C922. But I would definitely pair any of these devices with some sort of light like the ones I reviewed on this channel. The Kiyo has the widest field of view at 81.6 degrees, but it's not too far off from the C920 and C922 with a 78 degree field of view. Newer webcams have made wide field of views the norm, but for personal use, this is still sufficient for capturing your face and upper body. The autofocus on all these devices is pretty good. They go back and forth. Still, I try to turn the autofocus off since the seeking can be distracting. Here's some footage with the C920 at 1080-30, but the C922 and Kiyo at 720 60 frames per second. There's two real reasons to use the 60 frames per second over 30 frames per second. With 60 frames per second, the video is obviously going to be a lot smoother. The more motion there is, the more noticeable this is. At full screen, the drop in sharpness and overall quality is too much to justify for me. So for anything where your camera is full screen, I would keep it at 1080-30. The second reason to use 60 frames per second footage is to match up with 60 frames per second gameplay. But how important is that actually to the quality of a video? Well, here are some clips of the Logitech C920 at 1080-30 and the other two devices at 720-60 overlaid on some 60 frames per second Tekken 7 gameplay. I got one. Wow, nice sidestep launch at second Dan. Oh, wow. Oh, I tried to dash. My dash didn't come out. Oh, got him. Oh no. Oh, hop kick! Yo! Round 4. Even with the image shrunk down to less than a fourth of its size, the C922 and the Kiyo just lose way too much detail in the image, to the point where they're not worth using in my opinion. But conversely, a 30 frames per second webcam on 60 frames per second gameplay footage isn't really all that distracting at all. You're not really moving that much and you don't sacrifice sharpness. And now for my verdict on which of these webcams is the best purchase. The Logitech C920 and C922 are basically the exact same webcam. The only difference is the C922 can do 720p 60 frames per second. As I demonstrated, I really don't like the amount of detail that you lose when you switch it over to 720p 60 frames per second, and I'd much rather keep that sharpness. So that's the only other thing that the C922 brings to the table. So for that price increase, I wouldn't bother with it. Now the Razer Kiyo wins in regards to sharpness, and it has a slightly wider field of view than the C920 and the C922, but it does struggle a lot with colors. You can see with the white balance of the wall, it's kind of like this green or blue or yellow. You can't like get it like white, just it's going to be one way or the other. And when it comes to a green screen, that's actually a really big problem, because you could probably see in that clip that I showed, I couldn't quite key out the green screen. It was having trouble on all the webcams getting out really clean, but there were like edges on the Kiyo that I just couldn't get rid of because it's kind of making everything green. The Kiyo also gets blown out whenever there's daylight coming in through the window. Even with the blinds closed, a lot of times it still just gets blasted. So ultimately, I recommend the Logitech C920. It is the cheapest of all these webcams. It is still the best budget webcam on the market. The only thing that you're missing is the 720p 60 frames per second option, and then you lose some of the sharpness compared to the Razer Kiyo. Links to each of these webcams is in the description. Now, if you want a webcam that can do 60 frames per second, but you don't want to lose out on that 1080p sharpness, or you want a webcam that can even do 4K, then I've reviewed and compared a bunch of premium webcams on this channel, including this device, the Logitech Brio. Links to my comparisons are in the description.